Well, thank you for coming. I rarely give presentations, as you'll appreciate, but I'm fat, disabled. I'll try to speak clearly, but there will be times when maybe you'll think, what on earth has he said? But there is a Camtasia recording of this, which I'll, with a bit of luck, upload onto something public. In fact, it should be possible to see this presentation on YouTube eventually. Thank you very much for coming. It's very kind of you to attend. I know that you are busy doing your actual studies, which are all law, in fact, for this audience. I am the president of the PPP Legal Awareness Society. That's an independent society here at PPP. And I would like to say, first of all, if you can, and you're a student at PPP, go on to the PPP students website, and I'll come on to that in a moment. This series of 4 workshops is about strategic management. There's a phrase which you'll become very accustomed about, which is called commercial awareness. And the problem with this phrase is that it means different things to different people. And the problem is partners who are very busy, who will interview you with their managing associates, if they haven't already interviewed you, probably have a sort of quite a vague understanding of what might mean for them, but they obviously live and breathe it. It's about being up to date about what is going on in the world around you from the point of view of what the city does. That's very London-centric. What the rest of the world does in the finance capitals, and what the major clients are, what their big transactions are. And I would like to draw attention, first of all, to this, if it uploads, which is the PPP students website. It's very slow here, I'm sorry about that. I run this society called the Legal Awareness Society. My perspective is therefore from the point of view of the client, the big corporate client, who will have a business plan, who will seek legal advice from Magic Silver Circle and other law firms about how to implement their business plan. And often this will be for them on an international basis. They will have to negotiate their head around corporate finance, debt finance, equity finance, mergers, acquisitions, intellectual property, a whole plethora of issues to engage a business in how they make money. And obviously, business people invariably don't have an in-depth understanding of the law and don't understand how to draw things. They're not regulated to do that function anyway. But if you can, I strongly recommend you to go to the bppstudents.com website. And I'm showing you this for a reason, that my society is called the Legal Awareness Society. And Sonia, I won't embarrass her by pointing to her, that would be rude. But if you see the employability label there, if you press on that, then you'll get to the Commercial Awareness Society, which is Sonia's society, and their perspective is not from the client, it's from the commercial lawyer, which most of you, in fact, all of you will probably be heading towards a training contract at some stage. As you will know, you have to do a training contract, unless you do ILACs or other routes, to enable yourself to be admitted onto the role of solicitors by the Solicitor Regulation Authority. Anyway, enough about that. This presentation is on a central theme. Here's our Facebook page, and here's our Twitter thread. It's nice to meet some of you whom I know very well off Twitter. It's an honor for me to meet you, and thank you for coming to this presentation. We're an independent society at BPP. In other words, what you hear here is separate from BPP. There's not official BPP teaching at all. It's just an independent society run by students for other students, and hopefully it's an informal, unthreatening way of you knowing some of the tools of the trade to learn the vocabulary about how commercial people think, and for you to read Legal Week, Financial Times and other sources, and for you to be able to understand it and to get inside the mindset of those firms that hopefully you'll work for one day. So I explained the premises, actually the difficulty in explaining to yourself and others what commercial awareness is. I myself did an MBA here at BPP, although I was originally at Cambridge a decade ago. And these 4 workshops are at master's level. You'll have seen some quite lengthy emails from me of reading material, which actually I don't mind if you print, because this workshop is pretty standalone. It's just to give you an idea of the types of issues that are important in this field, this precise second in the practitioner research arena. And especially will be interesting for you if you decide to do your training contract with a city commercial corporate firm. The themes are leadership, strategy, innovation, and marketing every week this month. But we're not to be confused with BPP proper. BPP is also, they run their own commercial awareness workshops. I would advise you to look on their website or to look up BPP Banger Commercial Awareness on Google, and you'll find details of their workshops. I think, unfortunately, it's the case that on top of knowing about commercial awareness, I think you have to be seen to be interested in commercial awareness, and if you can somehow convey that on your application form by going to these official workshops, then I think that is probably advisable. So the way to start out, Sonia was very kind to invite members of her society. I invited members of my society. I'm very lucky in that I have 7,000 followers on Twitter, including students, QCs, law firms, and other citizens who are interested, and I was able to accommodate all of you for coming today. And to explain the purpose of this first workshop is to briefly set the scene for why leadership is a buzzword. If you're reading The Guardian today, you will see Susan Moore talk about intersectionality. And of course, that's another buzzword for in The Guardian for Guardian readers. Leadership is a very important buzzword, but it conveys something incredibly important for why firms succeed and why they go wrong. So between now and about 10 past 7, it's 25 past 6 at the moment, I'm going to give you a very fast tour through the literature on leadership. Now, don't get panicky about this. It took me 3-4 months of doing this at in my MBA to read the papers, and it's quite a lengthy subject in itself. So I'm just going to give you a very naughty introduction, and I'm sorry about that. But if you do become interested in it, then the good news is that in your law firm they will be looking for possible leaders once you reach management associate level, and they will maybe send you out to their own business school to try and work out which of you might become leaders, the next generation of that particular firm. And this literature actually draws on a number of different strands. My own PhD was in neuroscience on how the brain works, and that is part of it, but part of it was also on how some corpus have totally screwed up on this. And I'll explain to you the relevance of that, so there's a sense of learning from my mistakes. I'll be able to explain to you different models of leaders: charismatic leaders, narcissistic leaders, people who love themselves, toxic leaders, people who've been, not defamatory, downright corrupt, often serving lengthy jail sentences, and how that has altered the landscape of leadership. I want to talk about situational leadership, partly for the crap reason that I'm followed on Twitter by one of the leading people who's contributed to this field, Ken Blanchard. I want to talk about change management. Obviously, law firms aren't in the corporate ones, rather aren't in the public sector. Some of you will end up in high street law firms, and this is relevant to you as well. But there currently are quite a number of changes in the public sector which are unavoidable. Somebody coined the phrase, which is slightly bastardized, that change is as unavoidable as death and taxes. And the point about that was to convey the fact that change is very hard to avoid, particularly if you include the first global financial crisis of 2008-9, which has totally changed the landscape of some firms that had to do quite major restructurings that will need to engage people who actually know about this, and the lawyers, and in the NHS, which is a very minor part of the stroke. They're currently going through a £3 billion reorganisation as we speak. So, law firm leaders. Now, the problem with the way the literature has evolved is it's all very easy to produce an artificial schism, dividing line, silo between managers and leaders, and this can often mess up the entire literature. Now, in fact, there have been some studies on this, and they think that as much as 72%, as many as 72% of leaders may not even have a formal job description. And that may seem ridiculous when you also couple that with another statistic that 9% of leaders do not work full-time. So maybe things get better as you rise up the scale. And it's been often said that leadership is like pornography. You recognize it when you see it. That means defining it can be difficult, but it probably does encompass a number of different things, such as being able to give a clear vision, being able to manage change, being able to support others. Now, this is where the dividing line between management and leadership becomes fuzzy, because leaders often are successful management partners, and they will have got to that position for managing good teams. It's impossible to get to partnership level without being a people person of some sort. Although there is a literature about solo leaders, entrepreneurs, can they make partners? But generally, it's very hard to make a partner by being totally devoid of any social characteristics. There have been some aphorisms about difference between managers and leaders. The most famous one is Peter Drucker, who said, late Peter Drucker said, leadership about doing the right things, management is about doing things right. I've got that right. Now, please Google that on to check the Peter Drucker aphorism. But it gives a sense of difference. A manager administers, a leader innovates. A manager copies, a leader is an original, and so it goes on. I'm just citing the long list of Walter Bennis in his famous book of 1989 on becoming a leader. How to select a leader? At some stage, you'll be interviewed for partnership and or some other equivalent job somewhere, and they will be trying to work up with their suitable, and there is unsurprisingly quite a big literature on how you select leaders. Are they trustworthy? Are they smart? Do they have a hidden agenda? I want to get political. Are they worth following? Now, there's quite a big intellectual argument about whether it's possible to be a leader without any followers, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. If you get a chance, follow Heather Towns on Twitter. Heather Townsend has written one of the top FT Financial Times books on how to make a partner have a life. Now, this will be of some interest as maybe you get more advanced in your career. And I mentioned also Stephen Mason. Stephen is Professor of Strategy at the College of Law, which is also a law school, and Stephen has come up with this way of thinking about things, how law firms operate, called rules. Now, the R stands for rates. Obviously, a partner charges different rates to associate. Utilization, how much your work is actually done doing the actual nitty-gritty of law. Leverage, how much of a firm is taken up by fee earners, how much of it is done by partners. Expenses, how much your costs are, and speed, how quickly you are doing things. This is a more managerial view of doing things, but our leader obviously has to give guidance on that, because the law firm has to be profitable, and you'll see that profitability is a major governing issue. So I want to change horses altogether and come on to emotional intelligence. Now, it's argued that you need to have some sort of ability to interact with other people to survive. That, of course, is a fundamentally Darwinian concept. I'll come on to adaptability when I talk about innovation towards the end of the month. But law firms which are truly incumbent and who cannot adapt to their changing circumstances will find themselves in a tricky mess in terms of profitability. And emotional intelligence, to link this, comes out of the fact that earlier this century there was appreciation that there were some people with enormous intellects who were just terrible at interacting with people. General intelligence is therefore dissociable from emotional intelligence. And Nick McIntosh, who's the Emeritus Professor of Psychology at Cambridge, is one of the world's leaders on general intelligence. If you ever go on to do the SHL verbal reasoning test, the H is Roger Holdsworth, who in fact trained at Cambridge, and he's been influenced by general intelligence for designing these tests. Obviously, these tests on general intelligence do not tap on cognitive skills, such as on emotional skills, rather, how you interact with people. And this is probably a failing of the Crumbs selection system. If you get a chance, have a look at Dan Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. And if you can, read about the history of this, which is actually from the 1950s. Dan's book is from 1995, but the ability-based model is quite a complex and convincing model of how, as people, we perceive, use, understand, and manage our own emotions. Mark Baxter, this is very brief, don't worry, talks about how the brain has evolved, and actually this is not just pie in the sky popsky rubbish. It's that Mark's currently head of neuroscience at Harvard, and he's written quite a number of useful reviews about how it's possible to map out in evolution terms how emotion has parted company with cognition in evolutionary history. But I don't want to talk about that. In terms of being a leader, Dan argues in quite seminal papers in Harvard Business Review on becoming a good leader, for example, that the emotional intelligence construct is built around 5 different themes: self-awareness, how good you are at recognizing your own emotions; self-regulation, how good you are stopping maladaptive impulses; motivation, how much is your drive to succeed. And this is bound to be a factor once you overcome an obstacle. It's said that one of the competencies of law firms is that they want to see have you adapted to something which has been challenging in the past. For example, Alan Novy, for the last 3 years, has been asking a competence-based question on describe an obstacle you've overcome, which may seem like an odd question to ask, but it gives you real insight of how that person has been able to overcome a difficulty for them, and actually is strongly correlated with future leadership. Empathy, for example, if you ever do something called a situational judgment test for a big law firm, Evershares do them, Cliffertons used to do them, you'll have a question like, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and everyone's feeling tired and they're having difficulty in drafting an international contract. Do you A, go out and buy everyone a strong cup of coffee, or B, do you give them a lecture on a minute aspect of law pertaining to that contract and stuff? And so that example just to tell you, you're meant to be sensitive about the world around you. They don't want people who are utterly useless at sensing the environment around them. Hence the purpose of asking about that. And teamwork, persuasiveness, you'll be aware that some firms quite big into group work. They'll watch you in groups of 5 or 6, watch you in action as you overcome a situation, and they'll just watch you how you interact with people. Whether, like an episode of The Apprentice, whether you just barge in there and just take over the whole thing and screw everything up for everyone, or whether you'll maybe stand back and listen to people before offering something sensible for the benefit of the whole team. So anyway, I've sort of made a bit of a meal of that, but if you look at the Harvard Business Review, or look up on Google Daniel Goleman, you'll find, if you look up emotional intelligence on Wikipedia, you'll find the same thing, and hopefully it will be interesting to you. Unfortunately, it has been, to some extent, been taken over by occupational psychologists who want to sell you an emotional intelligence test. And they use language such as this. It's like a high performance engine, and we want to manage ourselves to perform at our full potential, and it's a lot of it is marketing, but the actual science of it is very well established. So, I want to change gear altogether, and you appreciate there's a lot for me to get through. It's now 6:42. I'm aiming to wind up by half an hour's time. This is, of course, the great Mahatma Gandhi. It's hard actually to find examples of leaders. You'll understand this when I come on to later examples of narcissistic leaders or toxic leaders without being potentially defamatory. And as I'm going to put this onto YouTube, I want to be quite careful about the examples I pick. But anyway, it's recognized that Mahatma Gandhi is recognized as being an example of a charismatic leader. And the problem with this presentation, there are many, of course, but one is linking up to YouTube. So bear with me. If this goes P-Tong, please bear with me. But this is a seminal speech from 1963. Martin Luther King. I'm going to show you 1 minute of it.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the word of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
I'm not going to show you the full 13 minutes, but if you get a chance, actually read the speech. It's whatever your religious, political creed. It's an interesting speech, and don't want to ruin this surprise of how well crafted it is, but Martin Luther King is another example of a charismatic leader. So, actually, so far in summary, I've given examples of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but uh, uh, the literature has evolved. Not all leaders are these sanely great moral people. In fact, if you follow the literature, Hitler shows characteristics of being a charismatic leader. Obviously, I'm not going to say that anyone regulated by the Bar Standards Board or the SRA would go nearly as bad as that, but it's useful for you to be aware of where things have gone wrong or what the futures maybe of this type of leadership may be for you to engage people in a constructive manner. Max Weber gives this definition of charismatic leadership, which I'm not going to read out. And general attributes are intelligent, innovative, persuasive, magnetic. And the thing to say here, I use the word features very carefully there. I could have said traits. Whether this is a trait or a state phenomenon, whether people can just turn it on or turn it off, is actually of interest. Whether people are just naturally charismatic like that, or whether they can just turn it on. And you see this also discussed in literature. And as in law, there are balancing competing interests. It's impossible to discuss charismatic leadership without understanding there are two sides of the coin. One is the leader who shows aspects of charisma, however that is defined. And one characteristic is obviously of the nature of the followers. Now, it tends to be argued that followers tend to be in a particular economic, social, or politically oppressed construct. This again is debatable, but something for you to be aware of in the literature. And Max Weber and others have come up with a six-stage step of development of the charismatic leadership. One is identification by the general public or potential charismatic leaders like Steve Jobs, ex-CEO of Apple, rest in peace, and Barack Obama, who got re-elected despite enormous difficulty in the States. Activity arousal is where the leader is able to press the right buttons. 3 is commitment from the followers to embrace this type of leadership as opposed to other people on market like Sarah Palin. And you see steps 1 and 2 and 3 taken cumulatively are really the formation of the relationship. Steps 4 and 5 are when things go wrong. Disenchantment, depersonalization, alienation, where people just lose interest. The leaders stop saying charismatic things that make you think, but start saying routine things which don't make you think, and people switch off. And steps 4, 5, 6 are interesting, watching the demise of these people. I want to now come on to the second example, which is crisis leadership. You'll appreciate in the 70s, the Labour government hit another crisis, and James Callaghan came up with this mortal phrase, crisis, what crisis, which sort of epitomizes bad crisis leadership. And I want to talk about how crises evolve. Crises, they think, do not have any particular boundary. They can happen in the public sector as well as the private sector, and they can happen to anyone. And often it's argued that people who react badly to crises are people who just ignore the information that there is a crisis happening, or they simply stonewall the crisis. They refuse to engage with the crisis at all. And you'll see this in law firms and other corporates. For example, Starbucks. Now, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but they obviously had to negotiate the debate about tax, and obviously the public were concerned about corporates acting ethically about tax, and you can see all these PR people immediately swinging into action, thinking, well, we have a problem here, that people will think many corporates, Starbucks is not the only one in the press, but we have been engaging in fruitful tax ways. I have to be careful what I say, but you can see it's a very important skill, whatever you do in life, to be able to spot your crisis and to be able to deal with it. Baldoni in 2011 offered this mechanism for thinking about how to go about a crisis. Firstly, take a moment to figure out what's going on, which sounds a bit trite, but what that's telling you is simply don't go in there sort of guns a-blazing like a bull in a china shop. Act promptly, but not hurriedly. In relation to that point, manage expectations, and that's to do with finding out what people's concerns are, and to be able to offer a mechanism of dealing with it. Demonstrate control. Now, control is tied up with the nature of the cause of the crisis may not be immediately obvious. Take, for example, the global financial crash. Well, you can argue till cows come home as to whether this was a failure or regulation of securitized mortgages or not. But either way, you see leaders like, for example, Deborah Meaden from Dragon's Den saying, often, if you experience in a business or law firm a crisis, people are often more interested in how you deal with it, rather than necessarily having a PhD thesis on what caused it in the first place. And the last thing is keeping calm. You want to inspire confidence. You don't want to go around saying don't panic and making panic. You want to be able to take charge of the situation. So this is a different type of leadership. Charismatic is one, crisis is another, but the point I want to make is that at different times in your life, you probably will use a type of leadership which will be appropriate for that particular moment in time. And if you apply it as a formula, then it's going to go wrong. But if you know that people are feeling hard done by, now it's time for charismatic leadership. We've had this crisis. Now it's time to probably use some elements of crisis leadership. You can see where this is heading, so that you know about different types of leadership for different situations. Hurricane Katrina, if you Google this, is a very interesting case of how crisis management goes wrong. In fact, some blame George Bush's lack of electoral success on how he dealt with this. As you'll appreciate, Obama was very careful of how he dealt with the hurricane last year in comparison. And some have said the way he dealt with it was quite a unique selling point compared to Mitt Romney, but I don't want to get political about that. Common failures may include not believing the situation, being quite slow to adapt to new phenomena, or not taking responsibility, a sort of I'm not bothered, not me gov type of approach. This was famously said of Bush, and by the way, there's a very detailed handout, which I don't suggest you read unless you're very bored, but it does contain some useful background or where this presentation has come from. Not me making it up, it's common literature, or some of it. And this is said of George Bush. When you see people on rooftops, you don't sit around worrying about whose responsibility it is. George Bush's paradigm, not how to, but in fairness, he also had to cope with 9/11, and so the different George Bush, admittedly. And crisis teams, you see a fine line between teamwork and leadership. If you want to look into crisis teams, an issue on leadership is how your message gets filtered down to other people. With any big organization, you quite often have middlemen who are a bit jobsworthy. They may not be quite willing to stick their neck out and do something different. They will not want to preserve their job security. So the issue for middle managers is how leaders can convey leadership in such circumstances, and how the middle managers can relay what they're being encouraged to junior staff. So if you want to, you can read about that literature as well. So I want to come on to narcissism. People who love themselves, and you will, if you already have not met them, recognize them. And narcissism is a personality trait. If you're interested in psychiatry, you'll know that DSM is a diagnostic and statistical manual for how psychiatric conditions are classified. Narcissism is one of them, not a condition per se, but it's a personality trait within personality disorders. And narcissism co-coalesces very strongly with impulsivity, if you're interested. Sometimes you'll see articles in the Financial Times weekend on narcissism and how these people have sprung up in spheres of life and how they've been good sometimes, how some of them have been disastrous. I won't cite any examples for this reason I've explained, but if you look up Michael Maccabee on Google, he's got his own website, which I don't remember the name of, but it's something like michaelmaccabee.com. Unsurprisingly, you'll find a fine line between being productive and being simply downright pathological. And again, it's like charisma. The way a narcissistic leader is able to get away with this stuff will depend very much on his follower group. If you've got a group of fans who just simply will not criticize anything you'll do, you're bound to be able to get away with it more than you otherwise would have done. Oh dear. Now, this is a quote from Michael Maccabee, where in fact he has given two examples, but I want to distance myself from any implication that these people are examples of productive narcissists. In fact, you can argue that productive narcissists is a compliment. But anyway, these are people who are good and can be motivating, have a very good feel-good factor on the people who are they're leading, and they often have the boldness and audacity to push through difficult decisions and difficult change. I can't actually think of many examples of narcissistic leaders, honestly, in legal firm, but I can think of some in business and other disciplines. They get the job done, and often, like, my own PhD was looking at the difference between risk-taking and impulsivity. I won't go into it there, but some people are just downright risk-takers. And it's an adage you'd find, not in finance, beg your pardon. It's an adage that sometimes you can't make an omelette without cracking eggs. And it can be a difficult. Some firms which are very successful have made some very intriguing but dodgy at the time strategic decisions. Enron. Now, Enron, I want to move swiftly on like a bad radio DJ onto a different type of leadership called toxic leadership. Toxic, if you've been following politics, does exactly what it says on the tin, like Bronzeville, is toxic. Enron was the seventh most successful corporation in the States, but its demise, in the last 3 minutes of my presentation, gives quite sobering insights into failure of a specific type of corporate culture. There's a phrase that's not how you fall, it's how you get up. Obviously, Enron was a disaster for US corporate culture. But out of it came the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And if you do elections in corporate funds, you hear your supervisor talk about Sarbanes-Oxley. Certainly if you do corporate governance, you will have heard about the Combined Code and people like Lord Turnbull Miners, etc., involved in how corporate governance should be a major factor. It's not just good enough. It's not just good enough to make money. It's the triple bottom line. You have to be obeying ethically the rule code and obeying the law. And where the law went wrong in Enron was the failure of statutory and fiduciary duty towards your stakeholders. And also, ethically, it was a major breakdown in trust. Fukuyama, not to be confused with the Fukuyama nuclear explosion, but Fukuyama's written interesting work on breakdown in trust in corporate cultures. And obviously, once you lose trust, you've lost a major part of the currency of your client relationship. So, at the risk of this going badly wrong, I'd like to recommend a film which is actually free on YouTube. If you get bored after the LPC or LB or LM or MBA, have a look at this film. I was meant to watch it during my MBA, but it's really fascinating view of the concepts of cover-up, deceit, toxic leadership, everything that you can imagine going wrong went wrong with this example. Enron, the smartest guys in the room. I won't use a swear word, but the guy in question, Jeff Skilling was one of them, is reputed to have said in his application to Harvard, he was asked, "Why should I take you?" And his answer was, "Because I'm bleep smart." But he wasn't smart. He served a very lengthy prison sentence.